I might have known if David Keck would have me come here, he was going to make me work hard. That was a beautiful, beautiful baptism. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to do that. And this is such a wonderful experience for me to be back with you at Kimball Memorial Lutheran Church. I look around and I see a lot of very familiar faces. And I appreciate you for remembering who I am. I saw a picture of me in 1986, right when I came in, and I was astounded at how much hair I had and how dark it was. And I was seated, but I'm sure if I had been standing that perhaps my cincture would have been a little tighter than it is today. One of the things you learn after being a pastor for 30 years is that Lutherans are wonderful cooks, and I have never disappointed anyone in my church, beginning with the good people here at Kimball Memorial. I am sorry, we are going to be back with you in April, and I'm not sorry about that. But I'm sorry today that my wife and daughter are not with me. I made the joke about baptizing a Tar Heel. My daughter is actually a junior at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. All families have their skeletons that they try to keep in their closet. I'm very proud of her and very proud of her association there. She is very involved with Lutheran campus ministry at UNC, and they are celebrating Parents' Weekend. She has a part in the worship service, and so Ann is with her today at Holy Trinity Lutheran in Chapel Hill. But we will all be together with you in April. This is a tough text on which to preach any Sunday, but I think perhaps especially when you come back and you're expecting an easy word, a word that goes down very smoothly. Because certainly the text today from Luke's Gospel and the text that we've had the last several weeks have not been so easy to hear. One of the things that I remember from my mother whenever I would go a little hard on my younger cousins in football or in wrestling or in just horsing around, I remember my mother would always say, "You better watch out. What goes around comes around." And one of these days, they are not going to be smaller than you. They're not going to be weaker than you. One of these days, they will be just as strong as you are. And payback can be tough. Mark my words, she used to say, one of these days, the tables will be turned. With all due respect to my mother, God rest her soul, it's been my experience that rarely, if ever, is this the case. In my experience, true justice just doesn't happen that often. You know how it is. In this life, what goes around again and again and again. The powerful squash the weak, the rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poorer. Sometimes it seems that there is a great chasm set between the two, and it's rare that you ever see things really turn around. We all know that if there is not some agreement between the House and the Senate by midnight tomorrow, the government will partially shut down. This means that all of the national parks will be closed. Everyday tourists, that's hardworking men and women who save for their vacation, will be turned away. 40% of federal workers will be furloughed with no guarantee that the government is going to make up their lost wages. 1.5 million American service personnel will remain on the job, but they can't get paid. And even some congressional and White House staff may be furloughed. But do you think for a minute that Congress or the president will see their paychecks stop? Or will they be called and said, "Look, don't bother coming in today"? Well, of course that won't happen. Earlier in the summer, we had a terrible storm in Albemarle, really a line of storms that just ripped through our community. It was the only time, including Hurricane Hugo, that every resident in Albemarle was without power at the same time. And so who got their power back first? Well, it certainly wasn't the homeless shelter, and it wasn't the soup kitchen, and it wasn't the clothing closet or the food bank. It was the nice neighborhoods where the doctors and the lawyers and the Presbyterian ministers live. They were the ones who got their power back first. Some people, it seems, are always on the short end of the stick. As I'm sure Pastor Richard knows, Jesus has been giving it to us pretty hot and heavy over these past few weeks. Words that cut and are difficult to hear. I have to remind myself sometimes that this is the Gospel of Luke. And Luke is not just the beloved physician who tells stories of shepherds and mangers at Jesus' birth, and stories of prodigals who wander back home and are welcomed with open arms, and stories of lost sheep who are graciously brought back into the fold. No, this is also Luke, who has a passion for the poor and the downtrodden and the weak and the marginalized. This is Luke, who is concerned very much with justice and freedom and fairness for all of God's children. In Luke's gospel, Jesus is not just meek and mild. He is also hard and sharp and blunt, just like he is today. And so today, in keeping with these fun texts, today we are going to think together about money, about the gap that exists between the rich and the poor. Not because we want to, not because I think it would be good for you to do this, not because your pastors wanted me to come in and preach about money and then make a beeline out of town. No, we're going to think about money today because Jesus, in today's little story, today Jesus puts money on the agenda for all Christians. You know this story well. There was a rich man. He ate steak and lobster every day. He wore nice Brooks Brothers suits, Tommy Hilfiger pajamas, and silk boxer shorts from Lord & Taylor. He and his wife both drove very nice cars, and they lived in a large house with about 4 of those high-definition TVs that get every channel you could ever imagine. He had 3 sets of dishes, 3, every day, fine china, and even a set of Christmas china that he and his family just used during the holidays. It doesn't sound so rich to us, does it? But he is richer than 95% of the world's population. At the end of his driveway was this vagrant named Lazarus, whose name means God has helped, but you certainly can't tell it from Lazarus. He is emaciated and dirty. He wears tattered clothing. His skin is covered in open sores. He smells to high heaven. And Lazarus just sits there at the end of the man's driveway every day, hoping that one day this wealthy man will take pity on him and bring him some table scraps from that fancy restaurant where everything is a la carte. Leftovers a rich man's never going to eat anyway. He'll put them in the refrigerator for a couple of days and then throw them out with the trash. The rich man picked up that new iPhone 5S last Monday, the one with 64 gigs in space gray, because that's such a cool color. It was a bargain at only $400. Heck, the amount the rich man spends on 1 month's phone bill could buy Lazarus plenty of medicine to help heal his sores. With just the money he pays for the extra channels, the rich man could provide fresh, hot meals every day for Lazarus. But he won't even acknowledge Lazarus. He won't even look him in the eye. You can't really be responsible for these people, he thinks. They won't work. They just lay around waiting for a handout. It's a disgrace. These people usually get pretty much what they deserve. So far, this story is pretty unspectacular. It's just like one would expect. The rich man is enjoying his life, and the poor man who is tormented by his hunger, by his health, by his own life is pretty miserable. If my mother was here, I would say, "See, Mom, it's just like I told you. Nothing really ever changes in this old world of ours." Even Lazarus' death is no surprise. My goodness, we expected. He's looked like a skeleton for so long. We don't know if it was an infection or some other ailment that finished him off, but it's no surprise. But now, right here, this is where the story gets a little interesting. The rich man also dies. Now, we didn't see that coming, did we? He had great insurance. He had the best medical care that money could buy. He had a pricey membership down at the gym, and he worked out every day. But he dies. And so just like Lazarus, and maybe for the first time, they are equal. They're equal in death. Everybody dies. And then in a strange twist of fate, it was the kind of fate my mother used to talk about. In a strange twist of fate, the tables do get turned. And in the afterlife, Lazarus gets carried off to live in comfort, while the rich man ends up, well, we don't talk about where the rich man ends up in downtown churches like this, but I think we all know where the rich man ends up. And you might think that this would be enough to reform him, to sober him up, to put him wise to the error of his ways, but apparently not. Because this arrogant man, with the same air of superiority that he showed in this life, this man who never lifted a finger to help Lazarus, calls to Father Abraham and says, "Have mercy on me. Send little Lazarus to dip his finger in the water and to cool down my tongue." Father Abraham, I'm sorry, but it's hot as hell down here. Father Abraham cuts to the chase. He says, "Sorry, that's not the way things work around here, friend. During your lifetime, you lived in the lap of luxury, and Lazarus suffered. Well, now the shoe's on the other foot. Lazarus is going to be comforted here with me, and you, well, you've got a new life down there. And there's a huge chasm, there's a big ditch between his life and your life. And I'm sorry to say that there's no going back between the two." Rich men are not used to taking no for an answer. And so there's one more chance for him. Maybe Lazarus can just run an errand for him. "Send little Lazarus back to my 5 brothers to warn them, so they don't follow in my footsteps." "Nope," says Abraham. They have the scriptures. They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. You don't understand, the rich man says. I know my brothers too well. They're not going to read the Bible. But if somebody comes back from the dead, they will listen. Says Abraham, if they won't listen to the scriptures, they won't pay attention, even if somebody is raised from the dead. And that's the way the story ends. The curtain closes with Lazarus dipping strawberries in those big vats of chocolate, and the rich man up to his neck in flames. You see, Jesus tells this story differently from the way the world tells it. In Jesus' version, what goes around does come around. Or as we used to say back home, the sun don't shine on the same dog's back all the time. What a surprise. The weak don't always lose. The poor don't always get the shaft. With Jesus, the tables are turned. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. After about 4 weeks of these kind of lessons, I'm about luked out. I think I'm going to preach on the epistle lesson next week. You come here on Sunday morning, and I have to tell you, this is a beautiful church, and all of you look so good. And you're feeling good about yourself. I mean, I know some of you came back from football games at Appalachian State or North Carolina State or UNC Chapel Hill just to be here today. You could have been on the golf course. You could have been up in the mountains. You could have been curling up with that second cup of coffee. But no, you're here. And then I stand up and start hammering at all the problems of the world, and me coming back as a guest and all. But I want you to be fair to me, because I have got to tell you these things. Because being a Christian means that you are someone who is so in love with Jesus that what you want more than anything else is the truth. The truth about a world that is described here, where some have everything and others have nothing, and there's a great gap between rich and poor, and most scenes of misery are acted out beyond our view. But then Jesus gives us a glimpse of a new world where the roles are reversed and we see ourselves in a very different position from where we are now. The top go to the bottom go to the top, and our eyes are opened. One of the best questions to ask this morning is this: is this a story about good news or bad news? I guess it depends on where you and I are standing this morning. If we are looking for ourselves in this story, let me suggest that we look one place: the 5 brothers. Father Abraham refused to send anybody back from the dead to warn the brothers. But by telling this story, Jesus is warning us. We have the scriptures. We have this parable. And we certainly have Jesus, who did come back from the dead. All of these things serve as a stark reminder to us of a God who loves to upset the apple cart, of a God who cares for the poor and downtrodden, and of a God who expects us, his wealthy children in North America, to be merciful to the poor as well. In fact, we are much better off than the brothers because we have much more information than they ever thought about having. The question is, what will we do with this information? Thanks be to God, and amen.